Well, USC right now, without a media rights deal, is kind of the Anakin Skywalker of the Pac-12. But why?
Are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day if you're watching on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights-free and beloved Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show. We've got Marc Kulkin here of Locked On USC Trojans, and I want to hop right into it, Marc, because I'm curious as to your thoughts on my Star Wars-inspired take here. Anakin Skywalker in the Star Wars trilogy, for those of you who did not know, he becomes Darth Vader. Spoiler alert, he becomes Darth Vader after being the chosen one. And Obi-Wan says to him after defeating him on in battle at Mustafar, a volcanic planet, and he's watching his friend burn. He says, "You were the chosen one. It was said you would destroy the Sith, not join them, bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness." So, Marc, I just want to ask you, USC, when they hired Lincoln Riley, West Coast football was back. You had the biggest brand out here. You had Los Angeles. It was going to be humming. And then they decided to go to the Big Ten. Why do you think fundamentally, as someone who's been around USC for a long time, they ultimately decided that the Big Ten was the best place for them?
There needed to be a shift in the universe, a shift in the balance. USC had been the leader of the West Coast football for a long time, and it reached its ceiling. And in today's era, in today's world of college football, it's run by money. And if you don't have a lot of it, it's going to be hard to compete. So for whatever reason, even with the clout and the cachet that USC carried, it still wasn't able to compete with the rest of the universe in college football. So they said, you know what, we're going to join the dark side and we're going to follow the money. And eventually everything will balance itself out. We're going through a change right now. And, programs that are going to be not joining USC's force in the big conference, eventually things will settle down and they'll find their way. But for right now, it's turbulent, but USC had to do what they had to do.
So I want to push back on that notion slightly, because do you feel like, from USC's peak, because the easy answer to the question that I posed is, of course, well, they're going there for the money. And look, whether you're talking academic dollars or athletic dollars, yeah, that's certainly a motivating factor here. But if you're talking about it from an athletic competitive standpoint, Marc, from the time USC last appeared in the national championship game against Texas, last won one the year prior, they of course won two, leading into that all-time showdown at the Rose Bowl that I'm sure you'd rather forget. But for someone like me, that was just an awesome college football game, and one of my favorite games ever to watch, because it was just there was so much to it. But it's also why I'm bummed that USC is leaving the conference. I don't particularly care for that. But from then until now, USC has not been back to that peak level, right? They've shown glimpses. There was the Rose Bowl win with Sam Darnold. There was this past season with Caleb Williams. We'll see what this season ultimately entails. But I don't feel like what has kept USC from dominating college football the way they once did has ever been money, has it?
Well, in the past, it wasn't, because everything was always done under the table. I mean, allegedly, USC was paying Reggie Bush, to get in trouble. But we both know that wasn't the case. Today, you have to, compete with paying players making money above the table legally. So again, it's just a different dynamic. As far as the competitiveness, from the athletic standpoint, again, it's a domino effect. USC knows that, okay, now they're joining the big conference, more eyeballs, players, recruits want to play, they want to play against the best. I know for a fact when USC is recruiting in Southern California, there are certain programs that will steer players not just away from USC, but away from Pac-12 teams in general and say, hey, no, you need to go play in the SEC. You need to go play in the Big or in the Big 12 conference where it's more competitive. So, there's that dynamic as well. And that's just, I think when you have that onion and you start peeling back the layers, there's just a lot to it. And obviously money is going to be the first few layers you keep unraveling, but there's a lot attached to that.
Yeah. So do you feel at all though that they from an athletic standpoint, it's not totally weighing the comparison of being a fish in a bigger pond versus a big fish in a small pond? Because especially now with the 12-team college football playoff expansion coming, do you see USC having a tougher time getting to that national championship level in the Big Ten?
No. And I've talked about this before. When you're into the 12-team playoff era, you're going to have teams in there that are going to have 2 and possibly 3 losses.
You'll have 3 lost teams in there. It's part of the reason I lament the 12-team playoff so much.
I understand where you're coming from, but nevertheless, if those 3 losses on your resume are Ohio State, LSU, and Notre Dame, but you've beaten Michigan and pick 4 more top 10 teams, that's going to be the shift now. You're talking about a stronger strength of schedule, and that's what it was really supposed to be looked on. It's not, you shouldn't be looking at, well, they have 3 losses. It's okay to lose, but it's not okay to lose to Appy State at home. No offense to Appalachian State, but if you're Texas A&M or Michigan, you're not supposed to lose to Appalachian State at home.
Right.
It's okay. It's acceptable to lose at home to a Notre Dame, to an Ohio State, to an Alabama.
Yeah, no, I see it. And I don't think that, looking at teams and just assessing them based on their record has ever been a great way to look at college football. I think it's the way a lot of people have done it.
Well, here, let me just use this as an example. Go back to 2008, and I know we're comparing eras, but USC had 1 loss on their record. They had arguably the greatest defense college football had ever seen, and they lost 1 game that year on the road in overtime in the Pac-12. They ended up watching the national championship game from their couch.
Well, okay, so I see the point you're making. And by the way, I'm in favor of the 14 playoff for that very reason, right? 14 playoff, you wouldn't have Georgia win it the first time because that loss to Alabama would have been superseded in the SEC championship game. It could have knocked them out. But my issue with the 12-team play, I think 12 is just too many. I don't think you should have gone beyond 8.
Look, let's just cut right to the chase. Programs like Oregon are going to benefit from this. So I would probably dial back your violin playing.
Well, okay, that's an interesting conversation that I want to get into. But I also want to tell everybody about Built Bars because, as Marc knows, they are a delicious snack. And if you want a delicious snack without all the sugar and calories, then you need the best tasting protein bar ever, those being Built. You've got to try them. They're healthy. They taste amazing. They taste like candy bar because they're covered in 100% real chocolate. They've got a bunch of amazing flavors: churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream. I'm a mint brownie guy myself personally. You can get yours at your local Walmart or Sam's Club, while you can get your specialty flavors at built.com. Go get your next box. You can get to Sam's Club, run in, grab a 13-bar box with hit flavors: brownie batter puff and churro puff. You can thank me later. They've got a chewy marshmallow on the inside, still covered in 100% real chocolate, loaded with protein, low in calories and sugar. Okay, just real quick on the college football playoff front. Why do you think a program like Oregon or Washington, and we're going to talk about a couple other Pac-12 programs here in a second, the media rights space, why do you think they are poised to benefit from a 12-team playoff?
Because if you know that you're going to have, you have to fill in slots 7 through 12. And the Pac-12 is still going to be considered a Power 5 conference. If Oregon has one loss or two
Just
losses,
for those of you listening on podcast, Marc, put up air quotes around Power 5.
I'm just playing the role of Anakin here.
And playing it well.
So look, as long as their schedule is fine, they're not plugging in an Eastern Washington to go with, a Portland State with one major out of conference game. It's okay to lose. Like I said, it's okay to lose a couple of games a season. And if you're losing, and again, if you're losing to Washington and your major out of conference game, and you're 10-2 and you win your conference championship game, you go with an 11-2 season, of course you deserve to be in the playoffs.
But see, that's what's always made college football unique and special, that it's been so selective.
But it's changing.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Well, you really just sounded like my old Jewish grandfather, but you know what?
That's okay. Hey, a couple of my friends from college call me grandpa for a reason. I go to bed early. I've been having elbow problems. I don't like chains. There's whole litany of things there. But anyway, so now that we've established that Anakin Skywalker, or that USC is Anakin Skywalker, also known as, one of the greatest villains in cinematic history, they've left the Pac-12 in a precarious spot, Marc. And I want your thoughts on the media deal, because Pac-12 doesn't have one yet. They keep kicking the can down the road. Are you, as a USC fan, just kind of watching from the side and going, boy, this is justifying everything that I said about why going to the Big Ten was great? Is it just like sit back, grab a margarita, put your feet up and say, Jerry Seinfeld style with that famous gif, that's a shame?
There's times where I feel like Jerry Seinfeld, and there's other times where I open up my front door, I pick up the newspaper, and I look at my neighbors, and I go, man, I did that. I shut the door really fast.
What do you make of where the Pac-12 is at? A lot of people have varying opinions on where the media rights negotiations could go, what sort of value they could get. Obviously USC and UCLA took out, most of the Los Angeles market there, at least for having schools in that actual footprint. What do you make of what sort of deal you feel like the Pac-12 should be able to get?
Well, look, I read and see the same stuff you see on, in the news online. And it seems to be that their ceiling's going to be around 32 million. I don't know. Is San Diego State going to, break you guys through that ceiling? Are you going to be able to match the Big 12 media deal that, they're so proud of? Like I said, is San Diego State throwing second place parades something that you want to associate yourself with? Is that going to bring more eyeballs? Because remember, San Diego State, they're a basketball school, sort of, and people really don't tune into your conference for basketball. They do, but you better have a really strong football program associated with it.
Right.
I don't know if the Pac-12, again, that's the problem, and why USC, and they took UCLA along with them. You get the TV market, you get the eyeballs, but you're taking the Pac-12's football brand. Everybody's talking about brand. When you talk about West Coast football, the first thing you think about, Cardinal and Gold.
Probably, yeah. And then I think, from a television standpoint, Oregon is also in there as the number 2, and it's huge that they're on board, at least at this point in time. At least that's kind of how it seems. But a question came in from one of you, and as a reminder, you can always get in the mailbag, YouTube comments, Twitter, at Smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12. Victor Kaiser raised an interesting point. He said, where do Cal and Stanford stand on all of this? I haven't heard anything about them. And this is why one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on, Marc, because USC or rather, Cal and Stanford probably even better than I do, even though I've, been following them as a sports fan my entire life. We'll just say you've been around a few more years than I have, not implying anything there, of course, but Stanford and Cal, all of these, yes, stroke the long, majestic beard, Gandalf, you can do it. So what do you make of kind of where Stanford and Cal do fit into all this sort of stuff?
It's interesting. Cal is actually USC's oldest rival. They've played them more than any other program in the conference. USC, Stanford, they're the two private universities. That was always their connection. Cal just they don't even get support from their own alumni and fan base.
Not recently. They used to.
And that's the problem, though. They didn't fill in when the used to people were around and giving financial donations. When those people moved on, they didn't have anybody filling in the gap. And now it's just this apathy that surrounds the entire sports program. And Stanford is always going to be, Stanford is, hey, if we're great at, the Olympic sports and we are competitive in the revenue sports, we're Stanford. That's great.
Yeah.
We got everything else to fall back on. So USC, I don't think they really care. When you talk to the elitists, the academics, they're always going to say, hey, we're all about research and all this kind of stuff. You got endowments. We've passed that era. And I wish there was a way to kind of bring it along, but
well, I don't think they've gotten out of, like, are you talking about presidents have bypassed the research and endowment era? Because I think that was a factor.
Look at the balance of power that's going to be remaining in the Pac-10 and the schools they're considering. There was a time where you had to be considered one of those top research schools. And when they started bringing the Colorado and Utah and the Arizona schools before them, it's been shipped. It's already been shipped away a little bit. And now it's at the point where, what makes us money? And that's what college and universities are all about, even at the academic level. I mean, USC charges a lot of money to go there.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
No, and it's getting more expensive every single year. And it's not just them. It's every college across the country.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think that the president's interests have become kind of multifaceted. I've talked about before a lot about, research dollars and, money and academic standing and all that sort of stuff. And one thing, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on this. And I've got another question about Stanford and Cal for you as well. USC and UCLA are, going to bring a lot to the Big Ten Conference athletically, media market wise. But the other thing too is those are prestigious academic schools. UCLA is, I believe, the most applied to public school in the country. They do oodles and oodles of research dollars. USC does, I believe, a pretty good amount. They're a private school. They've got, that sort of academic reputation. Everyone always gets caught up in the sports, but what's been your experience or kind of just your thoughts on where the academics do fit into that conversation?
It'll be interesting to watch to see how they blend it. You're going to have the student athletes on these extended trips. I know USC recently opened up a satellite campus in Washington, D.C. It had nothing to do with them joining the big, but it'll be interesting to see how the two blend. As far as USC, UCLA, Stanford, Cal, I think we spoke about this in the past. I would love to see on a rotational basis to keep those four schools playing each other annually somehow. And again, to incorporate, the schools USC is leaving behind in an out-of-conference basis. But as far as how the academics, I don't know. That's a great unknown. Will they ask certain programs to stay away from campus for, maybe over a week at a time? I guess is one way to look at it. I don't know where else.
What do you mean by like stay away from the?
Well, if you know how USC, how the Pac-12 works in conference games.
Yeah.
Thursday, Saturday. Sometimes you'll have.
Yeah. For basketball, it does that.
Right. Well, if you're going to go to, let's say USC is or UCLA is on the road, typically they're probably going to be traveling together for these types of things, to Indiana. You're going to have the opportunity now to play Indiana one day, Purdue the next in-conference game. Do you stay out there and say, all right, well, you've got Illinois Northwestern the following weekend, and then zip back home?
Oh, on the travel front. Okay, I see what you're saying.
I was trying to connect the dots there.
Yeah. No, I think it's an interesting logistical question. One I'm glad I don't have to try and figure out because it sounds complicated. I mean, there's so many sports at these schools.
When you threw the academics, I was like, I don't know where you're going with it.
Yeah. I get you there. So I want to bring it back to Stanford and Cal for just a moment because, academically, Marc, Stanford and Cal, perfect fits in the Big Ten. They're big research universities. They've got elite academic reputation. They're, academically, they are now the torch-bearing institutions in the Pac-12. Washington is now probably the clear at number 3, whereas before you would have put the LA schools somewhere in that mix. But I don't get the sense. I mean, the question that we got from Victor is correct that Stanford and Cal have been just super quiet. I mean, we haven't heard anything from them at all. Like, I don't get the sense that they have a burning desire necessarily to go to the Big Ten. Do you?
Well, that just goes back to my opening comment about this on this topic. If Cal's fans and alumni don't care, that's probably where the people in power at Cal and Stanford are getting their, taking their cue. If they're not getting any, pushback, why should they? I don't know how else to look at it.
Yeah, and I don't feel like they. Well, but I just wonder because we've talked about the Bay Area schools. If they ever wanted to take athletics super duper seriously, be all in, they could become really vital members of the Pac going forward. But that would be several years and several different coaching hires away. Though Marc Madsen at Cal is making some noise on the basketball front in a good way. That's a topic for another day. But Fardaws, Amac, Jalen Cone.
Those schools are swapping coaches left and right.
Yeah, I know. Troy Taylor's the Cal grad. He's the Stanford football coach. Marc Madsen, the Stanford grad. He's the Cal basketball coach. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. Like, could you imagine having a UCLA grad as USC's head coach and a USC grad as the UCLA basketball coach? Yeah, Marc's not feeling that sort of stuff. But I just wonder, with where Stanford and Cal sit in the academic community, if they look at the Big Ten and say, oh, that's super alluring. Yeah, we would love to go because, other schools, Oregon and Washington, for instance, I think Washington would have closer to a 60-40 athletic academic desire to be in the Big Ten. But for Oregon, it would be like 90-10, right?
I just, like I said, I don't think it's a huge factor right now. This is really, it's a business, and the universities know that they're going to get their donations on the academic side from the academics. If you want to generate more money for your university, athletics is a great way to do it. And if people are willing to pay for it from the TV networks, take their money.
It can be. It can also serve kind of as de facto marketing for your school. You hear those stats all the time, like when look at enrollment numbers at Alabama since Nick Saban took over. Mm-hmm. He's worth even more than he gets in his contract because their out-of-state enrollment skyrockets. That's worth more money, all that sort of stuff. So let's bring this back to football for just a moment, just for fun. But USC made what I thought was a curious hire of sorts. Their one-time but also non-time offensive coordinator, Kliff Kingsbury, is now going to be their quarterbacks coach on staff there. What did you make of that hire? Because I looked at it and just went, I felt like that relationship was, fissured. That'd be like the Colts hiring Josh McDaniels as their offensive coordinator. It's like he turned you down. He led you along and made you think he was going to be there for you, and then he bailed. Why do you think USC did this?
Believe it or not, this is something Lincoln, he actually talked about this just the other day. This is something that's been in the works for over a month, I guess. Their paths crossed, and Lincoln kind of floated the idea out there. And you talked about Nick Saban just a moment ago. I think this is Lincoln Riley dipping his toe in that I'm going to be Nick Saban, help a coach reclamation project type of thing, where Nick brings in somebody who maybe didn't have a good time at his previous job, helps them rebuild it, and sends them on their way to fall forward. Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian. Seriously though, when you can bring in somebody like a Kliff Kingsbury, who can maybe take some of the food off of Lincoln's plate so he can focus on other areas of the team, and Kliff knows how to work with quarterbacks and put together an offensive game plan, it's a positive. I mean, it's going to allow Lincoln to now literally focus on other details of the team. Remember, USC, they were pretty close to making the playoffs last year. Kliff Kingsbury isn't a defensive guy. He's not a special teams guy, but he's the big name that, Lincoln brought in, overshadowing the fact that he brought in a defensive analyst just a couple of weeks ago, Greg Brown, who's got oodles of experience at every level of football, including the NFL. So he's starting to, fill in those holes, so to speak, in the wall. He's got the spackle out, toothpaste, whatever. He's filling those little holes. And now he's, is he putting lipstick on a pig? We'll find out. But he's making the right moves.
Yeah. Last thing for today, do you feel like this dramatically changes USC's outlook in 2023 in a major way? Because it does feel like a short-term kind of move, right? Like you brought up Saban bringing in the coaches who didn't work elsewhere. They were never there for a very long time. Bill O'Brien, Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian, just keep going down the list there. This is 2 years maximum Kliff Kingsbury at USC. Yeah, that's why I said maximum. And Marc is flashing the one here for those of you listening on podcast. Like, that's probably what it feels like. Is it just kind of a let's just see what happens? There's no downside here.
Yeah, there really isn't any downside. And if you're looking to the future, even if he's only here for a year, 2 years max, it's not just Caleb Williams and USC this season who benefits. Miller Moss gets to work with him for at least a year. Nelson gets to work with him for at least a year. That's just more knowledge imparted. So there really isn't any negatives here. Maybe there's one out there. Pointed out to me, USC is probably not paying a whole lot of money for him. Pretty sure Arizona's picking up the biggest, big part of the tab.
Yeah, well, I don't think Kliff needs money right now. Exactly. I mean, you get bought out in the NFL. I mean, that's a lucrative business right there. Coaching, being bought out as a coach. I too would love to get fired from a Power 5 college football head coaching position one day. Not actually, because it's probably not very fun to get that sort of feeling. But on the plus side, you are A-okay financially.
Yeah, it was a nice parachute. Software.
Yeah, it most definitely is. Marc Kulkin's the host of Locked On USC, Monday through Friday on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Good to talk to you, Marc.
Yeah, Spencer, anytime, my man.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, have a wonderful rest of your day.